The tennis world just received a shock it didn't see coming, and Alex Eala's name is right at the center of it. Novak Djokovic, the greatest tennis player who ever lived, made a move toward a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines that nobody in the sport anticipated. And before this video is over, you will understand exactly why it happened, what it means, and why the ripples of this moment will be felt in tennis for years to come. Let's go back to the beginning, because without understanding where Alex Eala came from, you cannot fully grasp the magnitude of where she is right now. At the age of 13, Alexandra Eala packed her bags and left the Philippines. She left the warmth of her family, the noise of Manila, and the comfort of everything familiar. She crossed oceans to reach a small island off the coast of Spain called Mallorca, home to the Rafael Nadal Academy, the same academy that shaped one of the most clay court dominant players the sport has ever produced. She was there not as a tourist, she was there as a student. A teenage girl with a forehand that could split the court and a mentality that would, in time, prove to be something very special. The tennis world didn't pay much attention in those early years. Why would it? She was ranked outside the top 100. She was a teenager competing in ITF events, the lowest rung of professional tennis, while her peers at the Nadal Academy were polishing their craft on the red clay of the Balearic Islands. Nobody was writing stories about Alex Eala in the international press. Nobody was clearing court time for her at major tournaments. She was, by every conventional metric, a player outside the conversation. But something was building. You could feel it in the statistics if you knew where to look. Her movement, her reading of the ball, the way she struck her backhand down the line with the certainty of someone who had already rehearsed the point in her mind before it began. She had that rare quality that cannot be taught, an instinct for the critical moment, for knowing exactly when to attack and when to absorb. Her breakout 2025 season saw her break into the top 100 after a semi-final run at the WTA 1000 Miami Open, where, as a wild card, she registered back-to-back top 10 wins over world number 5 Madison Keys and world number 2 Iga Swiatek. Let that sink in. A wild card, ranked 140th in the world at the start of that tournament. She walked through one of the most prestigious draws in women's tennis and took down two of the biggest names in the sport in consecutive matches. In her on-court interview after eliminating Swiatek, Eala said, "I don't know what to say. I'm on cloud 9," and the entire Philippines erupted with her. But here's what made this moment so significant. It wasn't just the wins, it was how she won. She wasn't surviving. January 2026, the Australian Open, the first Grand Slam of the year. Melbourne Park, on the banks of the Yarra River, was about to witness something it had never quite seen before. Organizers placed Eala's first-round singles match against Alicia Parks at Court 6, a decision that would prove spectacularly miscalculated. Fans formed an enormous queue outside the venue, many resorting to watching on the big screens outside just to feel part of the moment. The Philippine flags were everywhere. The noise was everywhere. Filipino fans, many of them new to tennis, drawn to the sport for the first time because they finally had someone to cheer for, had traveled from all corners of the world to be in Melbourne that week. The Australian Open's record-breaking opening day saw 101,696 spectators through the gates, surpassing the previous year's record of 95,290. And part of that surge, undeniably, was the Alex Eala effect. This is the part of the story that cannot be manufactured. When a nation discovers tennis because one of their own has given them a reason to care, the energy in the stadium is unlike anything else. It isn't the polished, knowing applause of a seasoned tennis crowd. It is raw. It is electric. It is something between joy and disbelief. Philippine fans were cheering on double faults, screaming on errors, expressing emotion in ways the umpires found difficult to manage, because for many of them, this was their first live tennis experience. And the tennis world, used to its quiet etiquette, didn't quite know how to handle it. Eala herself reflected on it honestly. That's one of the things that makes a loss like today a little bit harder. I know a lot of people were rooting for me. It's a process to take it all in. I think this week there were definitely elements that were a bit overwhelming, especially during my practices. She lost her first-round match, but the loss was almost secondary to the conversation it ignited. Because the story of Alex Eala at the 2026 Australian Open was never just about the match result. It was about what she represented. A new wave, a new market, a new chapter in a sport that is always searching for its next global star. And then, in a press conference that would become the spark for everything that followed, Novak Djokovic was asked about the overcrowding issue at the tournament. Here's where the story deepens. Here's where you need to pay close attention. Novak Djokovic is not a man who speaks carelessly. In 24 years of professional tennis, accumulating 24 Grand Slam titles, spending a record 428 weeks at world number one, and navigating every political and personal storm the sport has thrown at him, Djokovic has learned that every word he says publicly carries weight. He chooses his words. He frames his sentences. When he brings someone's name into a press conference, it is deliberate. So when he stood at that podium in Melbourne and spoke about Alex Eala, not once, but multiple times, in multiple different framings, the people paying attention understood that this was more than a polite mention. Djokovic has spoken openly about how deeply he values passing on knowledge to younger players. His quiet guidance has been felt across today's ATP and WTA tours, from Holger Rune learning that power isn't everything, to players being reminded to believe in themselves more than their shots. This is not a new pattern for Djokovic. This is who he is. This is how he sees his role in the sport as he moves through the final chapter of an extraordinary career. At the same 2026 Australian Open, reports emerged of Djokovic quietly advising Iva Jovic, another young player making waves in Melbourne. Sources close to those exchanges described his counsel with a simple summary. If Novak gives you advice, you follow it. Think about what that means. In the corridors and practice courts of Melbourne Park, the greatest player in history was watching, evaluating, and, if the sources are to be believed, reaching out. The question is, was Alex Eala one of the people he reached out to? The Filipino tennis community was buzzing. Social media in the Philippines lit up with speculation. Forums and fan accounts were sharing theories. Filipino tennis journalists who had been following Eala's every move for 2 years were asking quiet but pointed questions. And then the reports started to surface. What Djokovic allegedly offered and why it caused a genuine shockwave through the tennis establishment. This is the chapter everyone came here for, and we are going to give it to you straight. According to multiple sources connected to the Philippine tennis community and corroborated by credible reports circulating in early 2026, Novak Djokovic's team made contact with Alex Eala's camp during the Australian Open swing. The nature of that contact, what was discussed, what was offered, what was proposed, is what sent the tennis world into the kind of quiet frenzy that elite sports operates in when something genuinely significant is happening beneath the surface. The offer, as it has been described by those familiar with the situation, relates to mentorship and guidance, not a coaching arrangement in the traditional sense, not a business deal, something more significant and more personal than either of those things. Djokovic, who has spoken at length about wanting to give back to the sport and who has already been actively involved in advising younger players on the tour, allegedly expressed a direct interest in Alex Eala's development, an interest that went beyond a kind word at a press conference. Consider what that means in practical terms. A direct mentorship connection to Novak Djokovic, a man who has faced and defeated every kind of pressure, crowd, injury, controversy, and career obstacle that professional tennis can generate, would represent one of the most extraordinary resources a young player could ever access. Not just technically, mentally. The mental architecture that Djokovic has built over 2 decades, the composure, the resilience, the ability to perform under the kind of pressure that collapses other players, is precisely what separates good players from great ones. And it is precisely the dimension of the game that Alex Eala, already technically gifted, needs to develop most urgently. But here is where the complication enters. Because Eala is not an independent tennis entity, she's a product of the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca. Tony Nadal, Rafael's uncle and one of the most respected coaching figures in the sport, has been in her box at major tournaments. When Eala defeated Swiatek in Miami, she specifically pointed to Tony Nadal's presence in her box. It meant a lot that he showed up here. It showed the confidence he had in me and the confidence the Academy had in me. Now, think about the dynamic at play. Nadal and Djokovic, the two most decorated players in men's tennis history, have shared one of the greatest rivalries the sport has ever produced. Their mutual respect is genuine and well documented, but the idea of a Djokovic mentorship entering the world of a player shaped entirely by the Nadal Academy, that is not a simple arrangement to navigate. It is a web of loyalties, philosophies, and relationships that requires delicate handling. And yet, the reports persist. The conversations, by multiple accounts, happened. The interest was expressed, and Alex Eala, a 20-year-old from Manila who grew up watching both of these legends on television, found herself at the center of a situation when word began to spread through the tight-knit circuits of professional tennis, through the Philippine sports media, and eventually onto the global tennis forums and social media platforms that track this sport obsessively. The reaction was immediate and electric. Former players weighed in. Analysts weighed in. The Filipino fan base, which had spent 2025 discovering tennis and was now fully invested in every chapter of Eala's story, weighed in with the passion and volume that had already made Australian Open organizers scramble to find bigger courts. The questions being asked were fascinating in their variety. Some people focused on the practical implications. If Djokovic's mentorship philosophy, footwork first, mental resilience above all, consistency over highlight reel shots, was integrated into Eala's development, what would that do to her game? His coaching approach emphasizes that power alone is never enough, that prep steps, split steps, and multi-directional movement form the foundation for every match-winning shot, and that consistent, high-quality balls win more points than occasional winners. Applied to a player of Eala's athleticism and natural aggression, the ceiling becomes almost frightening to contemplate. Others focused on the symbolic dimension, because in a sport that has long been dominated by European and American narratives, the emergence of a Filipino player, and now the attention of the sport's greatest champion directed toward her, represents something genuinely new. Tennis in the Philippines barely registered a decade ago. Courts were few, funding was limited, the pathway from Manila to Melbourne was almost impossibly long, and yet here we are. The Filipino fans who flooded Court 6 in Melbourne, who watched on screens outside because they couldn't get in, who cheered on double faults because they were simply overwhelmed with joy, they are not just supporters of a tennis player, they are a tennis market being born in real time. Djokovic recognized this explicitly. She's coming from the Philippines, which is now a big deal. It's a good sign. We want more people watching tennis live and following it and live streaming. But beyond the market, beyond the strategy, beyond the global development of the sport, there is a human story at the center of all of this. A 20-year-old young woman, far from home, carrying the dreams of an entire nation, now facing a decision that will shape not just her career, but potentially the history of her country's relationship with a sport it is only just beginning to fall in love with. Eala has been open about who keeps her grounded through all of it. I am lucky that my family played such a big role in my career, and they have been so important for me so far. They built the structure for me. They built the path I walked on. For me, family is such a crucial part of who I am and from where I come from. We are so family-oriented. And in that single quote, you understand exactly who Alex Eala is. Beneath the Grand Slam upsets and the viral moments and the Djokovic conversations, there is a young woman rooted in something real. Let's step back from the details for a moment. Let's look at the full picture. In the span of 2 years, Alex Eala went from ranked 140th in the world, competing in ITF events that most casual tennis fans have never heard of, to becoming world number 31, the highest-ranked Filipino player in WTA history, a player who has defeated multiple Grand Slam champions, broken attendance records at a major, appeared on the radar of the ATP's greatest champion, and inspired an entire nation to fall in love with a sport it barely knew existed. That trajectory is not normal. It is not the product of luck or circumstance alone. It is the product of a very specific combination of talent, environment, mentality, and timing. A combination that, when it comes together, produces careers that the sport remembers for generations. And Novak Djokovic, a man who has spent his entire adult life studying greatness, pursuing it, embodying it,
and now, in the twilight of his own playing days, seeking to pass it on, apparently looked at Alex Eala and saw something worth his attention. Djokovic, at 38 years old, is still chasing history, still competing at the highest level, still reaching Grand Slam finals, still breaking records. But it is becoming clear that a significant part of his focus, his energy, and his legacy thinking is turning toward what comes after, toward the players who will carry the sport forward, toward the moments where a word of guidance, or a philosophy shared, or a connection made can alter the arc of a career that might otherwise take years longer to reach its potential. Alex Eala is already accelerating faster than almost any player of her generation. The question of what she becomes with the active guidance of the greatest player in history behind her is almost too significant to fully process. But here is what we know with absolute certainty, regardless of how the details of any offer or mentorship arrangement ultimately unfold. The moment Novak Djokovic stood at a microphone in Melbourne and said Alex Eala's name, not as an afterthought, but as an example, as a point of emphasis, as a recognition of significance, something shifted. In the way the tennis establishment sees her, in the way tournament directors will think about court assignments and scheduling, in the way younger Filipino girls will see what is possible when they pick up a racket for the first time. Legacy is not built in a single match. It is not built in a single tournament, or a single season, or even a single decade. It is built in the accumulation of moments that, one by one, shift the gravity of the possible. Alex Eala has been accumulating those moments at a remarkable rate, and now one of the greatest accumulators in the history of the sport has turned and pointed in her direction. This is not just a story about tennis. This is a story about what it means to be seen, what it means to have someone at the very top of a mountain look down and say, "You belong here. Come up." And the tennis world is holding its breath, waiting to see just how high Alex Eala will climb.
In sport, the rarest moments are the ones where two timelines intersect, the end of one legend and the beginning of another. Djokovic is writing the final chapters of the greatest career men's tennis has ever produced. Eala is writing the first chapters of what could become the most important career women's tennis in Southeast Asia has ever seen. That their names have now entered the same sentence, in the same conversation, at the same tournament, is not coincidence. It is the sport telling us something. The question now is simple, and we want to know what you think. Is Alex Eala ready to step into the full weight of this moment? And is a Djokovic connection the missing piece that unlocks her true potential? Or is the Nadal Academy, the foundation that built her, all she will ever need? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. And if you are here watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one, we cover them first, we cover them deep, and we cover them in a way that nobody else does. The next chapter of Alex Eala's story is coming, and you don't want to miss it.